what's the wildest freaking thing I can think of to push myself physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally? Well, for me is that 5-5-5, and it sounds crazy to some people. And that's where you don't have to go do 5-5-5 to push yourself, but that's where I love turning it back on people and saying, well, what's your misogi? What's your wild and crazy?
Regrets that I'm experiencing. I have totally lost it. I'm terribly, terribly sorry. I've never been good with this Google Calendar arrangements. I'm sorry for that.
No worries, we got it. I was just worried I was missing something else.
No, that's totally on my side. Yeah, no, it's totally on my end, and I had not taken it seriously enough. But the good news is that we are here and we are ready to hit probably nice 30-40 minutes mark. Do you think you've got that time?
Yeah, that works. That works fine.
Well, wonderful. I think it wouldn't be a secret of me to admit that the one and only thing that attracted the most of my attention that says on your profile on Matchmakers is that you have managed to hit 5 consecutive marathons in 5 consecutive days. And to somebody who's been into running, obviously I've never hit as long as a full marathon. I've hit the half marathon mark and a slightly bit over half a marathon, which would be 33 kilometers. Yeah, nice. Thanks. Yeah. But to me, that even to somebody who's kind of come close to a full marathon length, even that to somebody like myself sounds pretty impressive. We'll get into that. What would be your purpose in terms of getting yourself out on social media? Is it more exposure? Is it conveying the idea to the biggest audience? Why are you getting out, would you say?
Great question. So I'm a performance coach professionally, where I help people achieve their biggest goals in their personal lives and their professional lives. And so on my own social media channels, I love getting myself out there and sharing that with other people for a lot of different reasons. One, to inspire, to motivate, to connect with other people who are trying to push their limits. And those would be a couple quick answers I think of. I think one thing that oftentimes what I don't want is for people to think, oh, he's some professional athlete, or oh, he's some bachelor who has all the time in the world. And so right. That's where I love talking about. I'm a family man. I have 4 kids under the age of 8. My wife and I both have our own businesses that we're growing and leading, and so it's not like I have ample amounts of time, but this is something I believed in. I believe in pushing ourselves and testing our limits. And when we do that, it has a domino effect of positive things happen in our lives.
Indeed, for sure. Yeah, people take notice, right? People can pretend that it doesn't affect them, but when somebody pushes his limits, it can't but impress other people and surely moves others. What makes an optimal life in terms of functionality, you would say, as somebody who's how do you identify yourself? Coach, like human optimization,
a performance coach.
Yeah, performance coach. Yeah. So, what makes an optimal life in your opinion?
Great question. One, I could take a lot of different angles, but I'd say for me, what I see with the people I work with and my own life, what makes for an optimal life is being anxiously engaged in a good cause.
Anxiously engaged in a good cause. Interesting.
Yeah. And that good cause can be your family. It can be your work. It can be your health. It can be your relationships. But anxiously engaged in those. And sometimes we talk about balance. But what I've found is there isn't necessarily balance. 1 week, I might focus more on my relationship with my wife. And the next week, I might give a little more focus on my relationship with my kids. And the next week, I might give a little more focus on my relationship with my clients. And so it's never like this perfect balance, but I have very important things in my life that I'm anxiously engaged in. And that gives me the energy and the fuel keep pressing on.
Yeah, that's interesting, because the more I happen to have conversation with people like yourself, if you like, the more I keep hearing that the balance is a somewhat unrealistic standard. No matter how romantically beautiful it might be presented, it's barely attainable, right? It's barely achieved. So what is this thing about people pushing the agenda for the balance? You think, why do you keep hearing it from left and right about the importance of balance? Do you think it sells well, or is it something that appeals to the broadest audiences? What is that about the balance?
Yeah, I think because there's so many different important things in our lives. There's so many things. If you think about even my hands, right, and it's like this wheel, and there's very important spokes to that wheel, and when it is balanced, then you do have this motion, you do have this smoothness to it. But what I have found is it takes a zoomed out perspective. In the long run, in the big picture, I want to be a world-class husband, father, coach, athlete, and other important things in my life. But I can't focus on all of those at the same time. Right? And so I've got to focus on each one at a time. You can only focus on one thing at a time. So that's where you can't.
Some people claim that multitasking is unattainable for humans. Do you think we can even multitask by our nature, or is it not really the core of multitasking? Because even if when we think we multitask, we still focus on one exclusive area. Do you think multitasking is bullshit?
Multitasking is a load of crap. Yeah. And what I mean by that is you can multitask if it's subconscious. Right. Like you can breathe and walk at the same time. Right? You can brush your teeth probably and hold a conversation with someone at the same time. But anything that takes more focus than that, if it's not a subconscious activity, no, you can't multitask. And there's a ton of fascinating statistics behind multitasking, where you can lose up to 25% of your day is lost just transitioning from one activity to the next. Not the act of actually multitasking, but transitioning. And you think about that when you're on an email, and you're deep in an email, and then you get a notification on your phone, and then I respond to you on my phone, and then I go back to my email, but I have to think for a few moments, like, where was I? Let's see.
Yeah. It takes a bit to switch. Takes a bit of time to switch. When it comes to optimal nutrition, which I would imagine is a stellar, I think, aspect of optimizing human beings' existence, which sort of school do you fall into? Because we find ourselves in a total abundance of dietarian fads and approaches, and one person pushes for one, another for another. So where do you stand on optimal eating? How do you view that?
On optimal eating, is that what you said?
Yeah, optimal food choices.
Yeah, totally. That for me comes down to the individual, where it's such a, like, our bodies are as unique as our fingerprints, and there's no fingerprint that's the same across the whole world, right? So I think I can take advice from you with eating, but that's unique to your body type. And so that's where I think further understanding of our own body types need to be understood with regards to what we eat. I can eat 6 bagels, and that serves me well. That's fuel for my fire, for me running and being an active lifestyle. Whereas I could have a friend who eats 1 bagel, and their bum increases in size by 2 sizes. Right?
Oh, hell yeah.
So it's like, or their blood spikes, or you know, whatever. So that's where I really feel like what's at the core of eating healthy, and it's good fuel for your body.
Have you ever had that cases maybe with one of your clients where a client thought that he was on a right path in terms of eating, and he felt nice, but it didn't serve him well on the long term? You know, because I feel like it's hard sometimes. It's something similar, something bordering this, how do you call it? Intuitive eating. You must have heard about that.
Yes.
So when a lot of people, I'd like to hear your opinion on that approach. A lot of people think that they follow what their body dictates them to do, and they're supposed to feel good, but does it really objectively do them well? So, you know, have you had any peculiar cases where a client of yours thought one way but wasn't actually in correlation with his goals or something like that?
Well, I not necessarily with it. And when I say performance coach, that takes on a lot of different things. It's not just athletically speaking, but more so, how do you perform in your work as a leader, as a communicator? How is your mindset? Is your mindset at a high performance level? So I cover the spectrum from athletics to relationships to personal development, leadership, and so forth. But what you're talking about, that hits me where I have noticed within myself, it's a higher level of being in tune with our bodies, with that intuitive eating, right? Where if we are in tune, I can come back from a run and my body might crave salty things or sweet things or carbohydrates or fruit or like if I'm in tune with myself, I will have that intuition of what my body needs. However, what I find to be harder to navigate are our habits behind eating. So specifically relating to eating habits, that's where my kids will come home from school and have an after school snack. And all of a sudden I find myself eating with them. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm not hungry. I don't need food right now. This is just me socially eating with my kids.
Binge
so that's
eating,
where I've had to create better
accompanying
habits.
Watching something with eating.
Totally. So that, and one fascinating way to get a grasp on intuitive eating is from fasting. Fasting, I think, is a fascinating idea where you're fasting food and or water for a period of time to really rid yourself of those habits. And when I fast, that's where I really notice where my social eating habits are versus where my intuitive.
So it kind of helps you recalibrate your attitude, right, towards certain food. It's like you reset it, and whatever is really necessary remains. You know, no bullshit, right? No habits.
Yeah, and then you have the discipline after fasting to then recognize, ooh, I'm eating after school snacks when I'm not hungry. So then you have the discipline to actually change that behavior or create new habits around that.
So what fasting patterns do you apply? Is it 16 per 8 or 21 once in a week?
Sometimes I'll do that. I try to do the 14, so going 14 hours. So like I'll eat dinner at 6:30 p.m. and then I won't eat breakfast until at least after 8:30 a.m. So just at 14. I'm not too extreme on that. Where I really like fasting is for 24 to 72 hours. And that's fasting all
You've done 72?
Yeah, I've done a 4-day fast. And
how was that?
That was fascinating. And
Really?
you only drink water for 4 days. And that was a 96-hour fast. And fascinating. It wasn't I didn't have the hunger pains that I thought I would, but it was more so the energy. I just noticed, if I stood up to talk to people or to be in front of a group, I had to quickly sit down afterwards because I just didn't have the energy for that.
It tends to happen. It tends to happen. The world tends to kind of disappear for some fraction of a second when you're really running low on energy. Interesting. So in terms of, now it's pretty obvious how one can push himself physically. What about expanding your borders sort of spiritually, psychologically? Have you practiced anything of that kind?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, a big part of my life is my spiritual side. I'm definitely a spiritual person. I love going to church. I love praying. I love reading scripture and good things to strengthen my spiritual side. And that for me is foundational. I need that in my life to really perform at my highest level because it keeps me grounded. It keeps me grounded in recognizing where my blessings are coming from and in serving others and being patient and trusting that when crap hits the fan, there's a reason for it or there's something I can learn from it versus being so upset and, why me? Why now? But it's like, what can I learn from this? What is God trying to teach me here? And that is huge. And on my 555 adventure, it was a solo trip. It was 5 marathons,
I imagine.
5 consecutive days in 5 different countries. And that was all solo and self-supported. So when I was deep in the back country of the Italian Dolomites, and I saw one person that day, I prayed a lot just for that mental and spiritual strength that I needed to keep pushing on physically. That's where the mental, spiritual, physical strength are all interwoven together.
And when it comes to prayer, do you tend to use this conventional biblical prayers, or is it something more personalized in your case?
Way more personalized.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I pray is like a conversation I'm having with you. You know, right now, where I'm talking to God. He knows me perfectly. He created me. And so if I can go to him and share with him my goals, my intentions, my frustrations, where I'm falling short, and ask for help or clarity with how I can improve, that to me is the biggest strength I can give or receive to then do anything in my life, to be a better husband, to be a better dad, to be a better leader, to be a better coach. And that's why I started in Switzerland on this marathon odyssey, and I actually went to church. It was on a Sunday, so I went to church in the morning, and it was amazing to start off that adventure with a spiritual dose and then go from there. But that's, really important to me.
When it comes to your spirituality, your religiousness, do you care about the objective truth, or do you mostly care whatever seems to be working for you? Because more and more I catch myself thinking that whether something is objectively even true, maybe that's a secondary question. Why would I even care as long as it serves the good cause for me and improves myself, I don't even care if that has to be objectively true. But then on another hand, I kept thinking, it's like, well, maybe the higher truth is still more prevalent other than the subjective truth. Maybe what you personally think on your own individual level is actually not that relevant compared to what appears to be objectively true. So I don't know, I'm a bit conflicted with that. Do you care about the objective truth or subjective, as long as it serves your purpose?
Yeah, well, I think anybody who's disciplined and who is committed to anything that's a beautiful thing. And even though I might not agree with everything out there, someone who's disciplined and committed to something, you've got to give them credit for that. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, as far as like spirituality goes for me, I like following Jesus. Like, I love following what he taught, how he taught it, and I'm really interested in the truths that he taught. And so call it what it is, but he taught some very clear things for us to do and think. And I know that when I try to align myself with what he taught, that's very important to me, versus just being spiritual or just being a good person. Like, those are good things. But I know one really perfect person, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and it's interesting is because I've also been thinking more and more about the fact how a lot of men particularly tend to create these idols for themselves. I don't know whether it's evolutionary dictated to us or it's something psychological that appears in most of males. And then I keep thinking, okay, whoever is your idol, sooner or later you are bound to kind of get heartbroken in a way by whatever they say or whatever they do. And then I think to myself, who appears to be this universal objective critique, if not Jesus, right? If you're gonna create yourself an idol, whether it be a famous person, somebody you look up to in multiple spheres, how fallible are they? Sooner or later you are bound to discover and be disappointed at most, right? So that's like this final ultimate critique through whose eyes you kind of put your actions, and that's beautiful. And I don't even consider myself religious, as I keep repeating often on my podcast, but I've just recently had this thought that I think this universal image of a saint figure, whether it be Jesus or I don't know, Buddha or whoever had come before, there must be some image of that kind, right? Especially for a man, for males, I believe. Yeah, and that's interesting. Why do you think we tend to create idols in the first place?
Idols?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's natural for us.
Yeah.
I think it's natural for us to look up to something or to value something, because when we do, that compels us to act. And I think of, actually, as you're saying this, the story in the scriptures where a young prince goes to Jesus He says, Jesus, what should I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, well, sell all your things and come follow me. And the young prince went away sorrowful because he had many riches. And he didn't want to sell them. He didn't want to give up his idols, as we're talking about, because he liked the fancy things, or he liked the things that a prince has. And so I think that's oftentimes the case of, instead of that young prince, following Jesus, he said, well, I guess that's not for me. Right? And how often do we shy away from things because it's hard? Because it asks something of us. We need to sacrifice something.
And how often do things that we own end up owing us, as they say in Fight Club, right? And
totally.
And it's pretty scary, but at the same time, I feel it's also quite natural when you develop certain addiction to whatever you've been intending to get or buy and achieve. May not even be a materialistic achievement for many
Totally.
cases.
And you said it. We can idolize fame. We can idolize money. We can idolize people, lifestyles. And that's where I really like religion and spirituality, because it challenges me. I love a good challenge. So for someone to say to love your enemies and bless them that curse you and do good to them who despitefully use you, that for me is like, man, challenge accepted. That's hard to do. But I know that when I do it, I feel, think, and perform so much better. So spirituality is a huge part of it. And not just my slant on it, but the high performers I work with, oftentimes it's fascinating as I watch them and they start getting in better shape. They start becoming a better leader or a better husband, a father, and they start creating this momentum in their life. Every single time spirituality becomes a part of their high performance.
Yeah, it can't be differently, right? It just can't be differently. There must be this puzzle. It's like, can you really even be outstandingly successful in some areas? If there's this irrational element, there must be some sort of, something that's got to be taken purely on faith level.
Yeah.
It's like you can't be at most rational in all aspects of your life.
Yeah.
So have you been always like that? Have you switched from a non-believing side to the otherwise? Because a lot of people find themselves switching. I notice, especially currently, like I still think religion is not on. It's not on the decline. I believe. I think it's never been, and I don't think it will be. So, have you switched, or have you always been like that?
I've always been like that. I grew up in a wonderful household where my parents shared the same faith and religion, and we would go to church, and I learned my relationship with God, and that's always been really important to me. And as I said before, I think, act, and perform at my highest level when I am also in tune or trying to be my best self, spiritually speaking. And that's where I just feel that harmony in my life, and I'm attracted to that. I love that harmony. I notice when I don't pray as much. I notice when I don't read, or when I don't study, or when I don't try to serve other people. Things change. I'm not thinking and operating at my best. And so that, for me, that's my intuitive compass. The same way, if we're in tune with our bodies, we know what we crave, we know what we need for fuel. And I believe, spiritually speaking, deep within us, there's a compass to guide us. But oftentimes, we cover it. We don't know what that is. And so, I don't know what that is. So I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go work more. I'm going to make more money. I'm going to buy more things. And we're like trying to fill that void, but
I hate repeating myself, but as recently as my latest podcast, I said this phrase by my favorite guitar player, Red Hot Chili Peppers, who said everybody's got a hole in his heart the size of God, and everybody tries to fill this hole differently. And it's like, it appears that the more I talk to religious people, the more I'm reminded of that quote, and I think it's pretty real. I think pretty actual, that quote is.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Great one.
Yeah. Who's got a harder life, you think, a non-believer or believing person on in general, without being personally subscribed to any particular cases, but who's got a harder life, you would say?
That's a great question. I've never heard that one before.
It comes from a film. I wish I could remember the title of that film, but that was a film about this eternal debate between believer and a non-believer, and it was very eloquently intertwined with personal story, and it's a love story at the same time. And I think generally that film does not show religious people in a good light. I don't remember. I do remember there was only, maybe you've seen that film. What's the name of this actress? She's the daughter of Aerosmith's frontman. Maybe you know who I'm talking about.
Oh boy, I don't. I'm not great.
Yeah, but such a good film. I bet you would like it. Although it challenges religious as people's perspective. It does challenge it. And one of the main characters, he said something along the lines of, do you think being faithful to God is difficult? Having no faith is the hardest. Living your life deprived of all sorts of spiritual belief is really the hardest. And that's what, it takes way more and it requires way bigger sacrifice than otherwise. And I've been thinking about that. So who do you think who's got a harder life?
I think who has it harder would be the non-believers.
Yeah.
And I say it very clearly because where I'm coming from is when the crap hits the fan, that's where you really see where people's hearts are. Mm-hmm. And you really see how people handle themselves. Mm-hmm. And one of my close friends right now, their wife is, her mom is dying of cancer. Mm. And I said, what foundation does she have to lean on to handle that of a dying parent? And he said, she doesn't have any. And it is rocking her world. Because what do you hold on to? What do you hold on to? What do you trust when the crap hits the fan, for lack of a better phrase? Because it's easy to just cruise through life when things are going well. But when you lose that job, when that spouse is sick, when your kids are struggling, when someone is dying of an illness that's unfair, how do you navigate that? And for me, that's where I see a very clear and full of faith and full of hope, trust in my religious beliefs versus someone who doesn't have that.
Yeah. So do you possibly find any other source of peace for non-believers who are faced with death?
I've never experienced being a non-believer, so I don't know that world. But I would be curious to ask a lot of my friends who are not believers to say, how do you handle? What do you lean on? How does that not cripple you? I mean, when I think of like losing one of my kids, that would cripple me if I didn't believe in a heaven where I can see them again. So for sure. I don't know.
Life appears way tougher once, certain prepositions are gone. Life appears way tougher for sure.
Yeah.
So let's get into the achievement itself. I've been intending, I think we've had a nice little preface, to kind of elaborate on the background. So how do you wake up one day and decide to hit 5 marathons in 5 days?
That's a great question, because I've thought about this a lot, and it's been decades in the making.
Yeah.
This has been decades in the making, where from a young age, I have learned to love pushing myself and pushing my limits, and not in huge ways like this, but it can be in small ways too. I think of my kids right now, of balancing across that log, across the stream, or trying something new if you're eating it or physically doing it. So from a young age, I learned to love the reward of pushing myself. And that had a domino effect, and then I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, where there was a plethora of opportunities to challenge myself physically in the outdoors. And so from running to doing sports growing up, I learned to love pushing my body to test my mind. And so about 6 months ago, I was actually kind of frustrated because I kept not giving up on myself. I kept letting myself down where I'd say, I'm going to run this morning. And then I wouldn't because it was cold and it was dark. And then I'd say, oh, I'm going to do this. And I wouldn't. And I was sick of that. I was annoyed by that. And I thought, gosh, what can I do to really have that compelling reason to do something? And so I thought of the idea to put something so big on the horizon that it would force me to train, because I knew that if I didn't train, it was gonna suck even harder. And so that's where I also read about this Japanese term called misogi, which is a term that is, the idea behind it is you do something so hard that it impacts all the other days that year. And you do something so hard that you don't know if it's totally possible to even do it.
Interesting.
And by attempting to do that, there's this spiritual, this transformational experience of really testing yourself. So I read about that and I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to do this. I want to do something to really challenge myself like this. So I had kind of trail running on the mind. I read about this Japanese term and I loved the idea behind it. And recently, or at the time, I had seen several pictures through the Alps. And I thought, gosh, that's beautiful. How can I get there and take that time away from my family, which is hard to do. Sometimes I feel guilty about that. But I thought, how can I create a meaningful experience that's compelling, that's transformational? And I thought, how can I see the most beautiful terrain in the shortest amount of time? And I thought, trail running. Because you're intimately connected with your surroundings. You're able to cover a lot of ground, see a lot of beautiful places. So that idea was birthed, and I started looking at the maps, and I started looking at different trail networks and researching different images.
What was your running experience prior to making that decision?
Prior to that, I grew up playing soccer and tennis, and I would run cross country to cross train for that. So I grew to love running. I would run a couple days a week just to keep physically active and stay in shape. But I'd never ran an official marathon.
Right.
I'd only done marathons or runs that were kind of random and whatnot. Like, for example, in college, I read a quote that said, if you only do what you know you can do, you never discover what you could do.
Right. That's a beautiful quote.
And I read that, and I immediately thought,
it's challenging,
never ran a marathon.
A lot. It's a scary one, intimidating,
Totally. So I read that in college, and that moment, I said, I've never ran a marathon. I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow. And I called up my girlfriend. I said, hey, can you drive me up this canyon, 26.2 miles, and I'll run back? And she said, yep. So the next day, she drove me up this canyon, 26.2, and I ran back. And I stashed water and things along the way.
Right.
But little things like that were little nudges of just seeing what's possible. So that was my running experience leading up to this.
Why? Yeah.
So then I had the idea birthed of I really wanted to push myself. I really wanted to see a lot of beautiful places. So I just had the random idea, what if I did a marathon in 5 days, 5 marathons in 5 days in 5 different countries? And as I thought about it, I was like, oh my
It feels
God.
like if you could come up with the most insane idea, that could probably win the nomination. It's like 5 marathons in 5 days alone sounds already crazy. In different countries, logistically must be quite well coordinated, right?
Yeah. And that was the big unknown. I believed I could run 5 marathons in a row. I believed it. I wasn't racing it. I just needed to survive it. Yeah. And that's where then it was birthed. And then logistically, that's where it came to be the hardest thing. Because as I said, I went to church on Sunday morning in Switzerland. And then I started my run at 10:30 a.m., which was late. That was late, but church ended at that time. So I would have preferred to start at like 6 a.m. But on that run, that set me off on a course then where I would be chasing the sunset every night in each country. So I would end each marathon with about 15 to 30 minutes before it was dark. Not sunset, but dark.
Right, right.
And then I would get water. I'd go get food somewhere. Oftentimes gas stations were the only places open. So I'd get like a ham sandwich.
So you would head to the airport right after a race is done, right?
And then I would hop in my rental car.
Yeah.
And then I would drive from place to place. So I would end a marathon, get food, get fuel, and start driving to the next
Always
country.
on the go, right?
Always on the go.
Never chill for a minute, I imagine, right? Maybe just sitting on a bench somewhere in a park for maximum.
Right. And then I'd pull over a couple hours later. I'd fold down the seats in the car, make a little bed in the back of this rental car, and then sleep. And then
how long did you sleep on average during those 5 days?
How much did I sleep?
How long on average was it?
On average, 6.5 hours.
Yeah.
But that wasn't like, I definitely had my fair share of interruptions, of just adjusting and whatnot.
And were you excited? Like, really, was there this spark in your eyes during this ordeal, this adventure? You probably couldn't wait to wake up to start on another day, you know?
That's a good point. At first, in Switzerland, that was my first marathon, and I had the idea keep coming up in my mind, what if I just do a half marathon?
Yeah, your brain is searching for ways out.
Yeah, because in the first 5 miles of that run, I had done 5,000 feet of elevation gain. And so it was just leg crushing those first 5 miles. And I thought, there's no way in heck I can do 4.5 more of these. And it was really discouraging, and it was hot, and I just thought, physically, I don't know if I can do this. And the thought kept coming, and people were walking the other way on the trail, and they would say, oh, where are you going? And I'd say, oh, I'm going here. And they would say, oh, you're not going to make it. And they were meaning I'm not going to make the last tram for the day to ride the tram down. But I was running down. But still, after people kept saying, oh, you're not going to make it. It was, for some reason, it felt like they were saying that about my whole life.
Yeah, well, these are your personal demons, you know, speaking on your insecurities. And those insecurities were not coming from nowhere. I mean, they're obviously based on something.
Because it was unknown. I didn't even know if I could do it. I believed I could, but then everyone telling me, oh, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. It's like, oh, my gosh. So then I thought, gosh, what if I just do 5 half marathons? And then I thought of myself going home and returning home, and I thought, there is no way in hell, pardon my language, that I'm going to go home and not do what I said I'm going to freaking do. Because
you had supposedly probably promised to quite a bunch of people about doing what you were about to do. And most importantly, before yourself, had you made some online promise? Had you made some big announcement to a lot of people before doing it?
Yeah, I had said, hey, this is what I'm training for. This has been a really cool experience just training for this and then going out. But the biggest thing was myself. I knew that if I settled for half marathons, that wouldn't be pushing myself to the maximum degree. And that idea was like, no freaking way. Like, I'm not going to stop until I hit 26.2 miles at every country, unless I'm broken. Like, that was my only caveat. If I break or if I'm injured, I'm not going to further the injury. But I made that decision once in Switzerland, and then those demons never showed up again. Because I decided once that I was going to do it, and I wasn't going to stop until it was done.
What was the pinnacle of most difficult aspect of that whole journey?
Each marathon averaged 8,000 feet of elevation gain.
Oh, wow.
So it was huge elevation gain. A lot of these trails were backcountry trails where it was really rugged terrain, rocks, roots, poles, and all sorts of random stuff. So the trail itself was really challenging, really technical. The other part that was exhausting was mentally. I was alone in another country. I didn't speak the language. And reading the maps, I didn't know if it was telling me a ridge was that way, or a canyon, or a peak, or a bathroom. I was just matching words. and trying to
Yeah,
connect.
it's like I keep forgetting that it's the trail, you know, and it's so easy to get lost during those trails. It's not like a city marathon where you precisely know where to go, right?
Totally. And these weren't necessarily marathon routes where it's like, oh, I just did this loop.
Yeah, yeah.
And so some of them it was point to point, and I would hitchhike back to my car. Others were loops, but then I'd have to, try to make it work. And my longest marathon run was 30 miles in the Italian Dolomites, and because I hit 26.2 miles and I was still behind a mountain. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, that's great. I did my marathon, but I still need to get back. So that was just mentally exhausting, with every trail junction needing to confirm and double check my mileage.
So what 5 countries were included in that route?
So I started in Switzerland, and then I went to Chamonix, France, and then I went to the Italian Dolomites, Austria, and Slovenia. I ended in Slovenia.
Wow.
So it was those 5, and I'd been to Germany before, so I decided to do Slovenia instead of Germany. And each one was unique and challenging in its own way. In Italy, I got stuck in 3 different rainstorms that just totally soaked me. And again, I was chasing the light. I was chasing the sunset. So it's just spooky. It was cold, it was dark, it was wet. And it was
was it like the plane landed right after the planes landed? You had to, the start of the race, trying to grab some snack on your way, getting maybe a nap, something like that. Did you even check in a hotel or some place where you know?
No, yeah. So because of time and I'm kind of a tightwad in that regard. Where it's like, I can sleep in the car. I slept in the car.
Well, I think that adds up to the whole journey. Why would you prefer to stay in a luxurious hotel when you can rough it up, right?
Totally. It was the Summerfest, the Misogi, right? So yeah, I was getting my own food. I was bathing in rivers and lakes. So I'd finish a run and I'd go jump in the lake, or I'd jump in a river.
Nice.
And then I was sleeping in back of the car every night. And then, so when the plane landed in Switzerland, I rented the car and immediately started driving to Interlaken. And that's where I started.
I just keep thinking to myself that at the end of the day, that's one of the biggest ideas of Stoicism. I'm sure you've heard of such philosophy that Marcus Aurelius advocated most loudly for. Whatever is close to the nature cannot be harmful to a human. Whatever, as long as you stay kind of intimately connected to the nature, you will always be good. No matter what anxiety and concerns and misfortunes life befalls you, as long as you stay, whatever that could mean for different people, that appears to mean different things. But whatever makes you closer to the nature, you shall always be healed. And that's imagine if you had to run those marathons in not that scenic views, maybe like a city, it would have been considerably harder, right? But since you were almost intimate with the nature, with the mountains, with the trails, you were kind of closer to God, I'd say so.
For sure. It was a spiritual experience, for sure, because it was only me, myself, and I, and God.
Right.
And so there were times where I tripped and fell, and I ran 100 feet down the trail, and I had the thought, check your phone pocket. So I checked my pocket, my phone was gone in Slovenia. Shit. And I thought, mother of pearl, right? So I turned around and I went right back to where I fell, and right on top of the leaves was my phone. Like little miracles like that. I was like, oh my word, like thank you. And other things like I didn't get one blister. I didn't get one hot spot. I didn't have any chafing. I fell once with 137 miles of running trails in the backcountry of the Alps. I fell once. Like that for me was like a miracle, because there were so many ankle breaking trail sections. Right. That was like, oh my word. So that was
what criticism did you face with during that adventure?
The biggest thing I'd say was just people saying, well, why would you do that? And like anything, anytime someone's trying to do something that, as you said, what's the wildest freaking thing I can think of to push myself physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally? Well, for me is that 5-5-5. And it sounds crazy to some people, And that's where you don't have to go do 5-5-5 to push yourself. But that's where I love turning it back on people and saying, well, what's your misogi? What's your wild and crazy? Maybe, you know, what's that thing that other people, nobody else will get? But for you, you're doing it because you want to freaking see what's possible.
Wouldn't be a crazily scary life with never challenging, when one is never challenged, and when one has never made a intimidating, loud decision publicly and then did his absolutely utmost best to fulfill his promise. I mean, that sounds sad sometimes and scary, and you feel like latest crazy physical thing that I embarked on was walking 50 kilometers. I don't know how much that is in miles. Took me, I don't know.
It's more than a marathon.
Yeah, for sure. A little bit longer. Yeah, but I was walking and it took me like 10 hours or something. And it also took the remnants of my soul out of my body, squeezed it to the last drop and put it back in my body. And man, was it a spiritual experience of all kinds of sorts. When people say spiritual, most often they refer to something blissful, enlightening, beautiful. And I never like that. It's got to be soul crushing, you know. But at the end, eventually I was questioning this, everything was put under the test, but eventually in retrospective, unbelievably happy that I've done that, you know.
That's so cool. And you're exactly right. Like, transformation is on the other side of challenge.
Yes.
Not on the other side of a blissful, beautiful experience.
Yeah.
And you think about the experiences in our lives that really shape us, and it's the challenge, it's the trial, it's the mountains that we need to conquer, the demons that we need to face.
Yes.
That's transformation.
And it's so beautiful. It adds up to the beauty of life so much, you know. But it's just there are these people that have never experienced any kind of victory of that sort, and they just would never be able to relate.
Totally. Yeah. And that's where it's a domino effect, where some people go from, they hear my story and they think, oh, what? They're going from 0 to then 5-5-5, and they're like, that's crazy. It's like, yeah, so what's your version of crazy right now?
Yeah. It doesn't have to be this crazy.
Totally. Just start with what's wild, what's courageous. What courageous action can you take today in your relationships, in your health, with your work, with your personal life? What courageous action can you take?
So, on a final note, what's next big thing for you on the horizon?
Great question. I've thought a lot about this because I'm hungering for like pushing myself at that level. And so I have a lot of small adventures that I do like weekly. Like a couple weeks ago, I ran my first half Ironman. And it wasn't an official race. It was just one that I put together with the local mountain range. So I swam a mile in a lake, and I biked 75 miles, and then I ran 10 miles. And I'd never done that before. So it has stirred within my mind pushing ourselves and seeing what's possible. A different side of it too, mentally, I'm trying to push myself, and I'm writing a book actually about this 5-5-5. It was so life-changing for me, and I love sharing the story and just letting it ignite within people. What's their challenge? What's their limit that they want to push up against, and see what's possible?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Do you hop on podcasts frequently? Do you run your own maybe?
You know, I've actually just started my own, and it's very simple, and it's just notes from myself as a performance coach. I just share 3 to 7 minute little recordings of things to help people, tips and tools to help people perform at their highest level.
Beautiful. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, sir. It's been nothing but pleasure. And I've got to apologize one more time, but nonetheless, we have managed to squeeze in a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Totally. Hey, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, bam. And we're done. So just practically 1 more minute before the recording is fully